First of all, I would like to say this story was written for my husband, who is from the East Coast. So it has a personal line through it as well, although we're not au point, or he's not au point, but certainly it is in the heritage. Dirty nails. Pieces of splintered rotting wood jut out of the red mud. I grab a handful of the muck and squeeze the earth between my fingers. It smells ripe and ancient. I remember Maman telling my grandpapa kept a bucket of red earth under his bed as his father did before him. He kept the dirt to remember the sacrifices, Maman said. This soil kept the Aquin name alive. Now the old homestead is in desperate need of repair, and I don't live in Prince Edward Island. Besides, I'm not a farmer. It would be easy to sell to a developer. I must make a decision. I'm digging around the old cellar when I find a cedar box. After wiping off the dirt and dust, I break the rusted lock and discover trinkets, recipes, and old letters. It takes a long time to translate them, but I get the gist. Now I understand why the Aquin have dirty nails. June 19th, 1873. Dear Mademoiselle Lise, I received your urgent note. Do not fear the Acadians will be swallowed up by the English should Prince Edward Island join the Confederation. I have asked many reputable men and have been assured the railway is worth a worthy investment. Unfortunately, great acts cost money. It does well for us to join the Confederates, and yes, I'm voting for it. As for the dike fields and farm, the acreage is small and not worth much. I suggest you sell it. I wish you goodwill, Oncle Martin. July 1, 1873. Cher Oncle Martin, I received your petite lettre. You must be happy, for today we are joined and a part of Canada. I pray for the Acadians. We have not always been received with welcome. As for the promises that a blessed railway will unite and enrich the people who have to be seen, that great act, as you call it, forces us further apart. Many farmers are leaving their homesteads. I was hoping you would offer us support. Instead, you sound like we were never born in Grand Prix. What would your father, my Pepe, say? He lived and died working the red earth. Do you not recall the story of Jean Point, our brave ancestor? You used to tell it to me. Have you forgotten? I will include the tale on a clean, separate piece of paper. I do not want his noble story to mingle with these sad words. Perhaps you will be the one to leave the town and join me. I wish you goodwill. Your loving niece. The story of Jean Aucoin. A lightweight boy named Jean Aucoin was working on the dikes in Ile Saint-Jean. He had a soul of hot iron, a gift from God. He needed this internal forge to survive on a windy eastern rock. Jean's papa had a strong back and thick, rough hands. But the night his spine bowed and he hung his head in prayer, Jean Aucoin knew there was great trouble. It was Maman who thumped a jug on the table and demanded to know if it was true. Were soldiers setting camp up in Grand Paris? Papa nodded. The priest had told him Colonel Winslow and his men were up from Massachusetts on special assignment. It was a ruse, of course. Rumor had it the soldiers were working for the English. But Governor Lawrence accepted our position of neutrality, said Maman. We don't have to make a pledge of allegiance to the English. Peut-être, said Papa. Through the warm August days, soldiers set up their tents and constructed a palisade around the parish of St. Charles-de-Maine. The church disappeared behind the rough-hewn wood to become a storage shed for the military. Such sacrilege. Young Jean walked to the church and asked, "How many soldiers are you, messieurs?" 300. "How many are we?" 2,000. Why did the Acadians choose to ignore the soldiers? They were farmers. It was a harvest time, and all hands were needed in the fields. For weeks, the Acadians clawed at the ground. Red mud caked their shoes, clung to their clothes, and ground into their nails. The soldiers demanded their fair share of Acadian grain for free. Again, the Acadians chose to ignore the signs. They gave their grain. One morning, a soldier came riding out to the field. He informed the men that all were to meet in the church for an important message. The farmers were worried. Would there be more demands for food? They needed a spy, someone to go into town and report back. Jean Aucoin volunteered. His papa patted him on the back and gave him instructions. Jean promised to return with the news and help with the harvest. He tore off to the church. At the gate, he was grabbed by one of the soldiers and a knife was put to his throat. Colonel Winslow emerged from the church. He showed no compassion for a 10-year-old boy and ordered the guards to throw him into the stockade. There was no escape. At 3 bells, the farmers arrived for the assembly. Colonel Winslow read the declaration to the Acadian people. The King of England was taking their land, money, possessions. Worse, the Acadians were to be exiled. 400 farmers were corralled as prisoners. Jean Aucoin found his papa. His hands were bloody. His eyes were swollen. Ne lâche pas, his papa said. Don't give up. The next day, the women were told to make food for the prisoners. Jean's maman showed up with a bruised face. She gave Jean his food and a handful of red soil. Remember this land, she said. The day of exile came. Transport ships bound for France and America were loaded with Acadians. Families were divided. Jean Aucoin never saw his papa or brothers again. He joined his mama and sisters. They too were marched off the land and herded to a sloop headed for America. Jean Aucoin's story lives because he was made a cabin boy. He survived the storms at sea and the sickness. It is said the captain could not unload his cargo in Philadelphia. The fear of smallpox crippled his business. When he could not leave, he set to his evil business. Jean Aucoin was warned to save his soul from the lustful hands of the captain. He jumped ship and never saw his maman or sister again. For a year he scrounged for food and work. He did not forget. He did not give up. Acadia, the red earth, called. He joined another ship and with God's grace was marooned back in Acadia. A miracle. The Aucoin name returned to the red land. He built a life we share because of this soil. Cher on, I will not surrender the farm. I will not forsake our namesake. I will sweat and suffer. I will carry the red earth under my nails. Elise Aucoin. The letters make me bow my head. I am an Aucoin. This is my home. I march outside and fill a bucket with red soil. I too will live a dirty